Originally, I was gonna, I believe I was gonna do a short presentation, and then there would be a panel discussion, which I thought was gonna be interesting. I don't think we managed to assemble the panel, so what I was gonna do was still have a short presentation, or a relatively short presentation, and then leave plenty of time for questions and answers, because I find that to work really well, at least if the questions are good, which I'm sure they will be. What I find when I travel, and I've traveled a lot in the last couple of years, is that people have a lot of questions, and they have all sorts of questions. Technical questions, questions about the future of Drupal, things that they're, worried about, all of these things. So feel free to let all of these questions come out at the end. But before I jump into those, I did want to give you a quick update on sort of the state of Drupal. And I try to localize it a little bit to Australia. And so with that, let's have a look at the, so it's localized, right? With that, let's have a quick look at the agenda. So first, I would like to look at some quick survey results. So as probably most of you know, every 2 or 3 years, I do a big survey. It's like the State of Drupal survey. And about 3,000 people, 3,000 Drupal people responded to the survey. And so I took a look at some of the Australia data in that survey, which I wanted to present. And then one topic which I wanted to address was sort of an existential question that a lot of people around the world seem to have, which is Drupal for the enterprise, or is Drupal becoming more and more for the enterprise? Or should Drupal be for the small users, the small businesses? And so I wanted to spend some time talking about that, because I do think it's an important question for us to answer. I'll give you my answer, and then I'll tell you what that means relative to Drupal 8. And so I'll give a quick state of the, state of Drupal 8 there as well. And then basically opening up the floor for discussion. Sounds good? Alrighty. So let's start with the survey. So I told you about 3,000 people responded. Only 4% of those, almost 5% of those, came from Australia. But the people that did reply, they seem to be very technical. They also seem to be, very skilled in Drupal. A lot of them told us that they had quite a bit of experience. Not only in terms of how they rate it themselves, but also in terms of how many years they've already been involved with Drupal. So a lot of technical people, and then a lot of people seem to be making money with Drupal, which is a good thing, right? Almost half of you seem to be making money with Drupal, with just Drupal. Basically, Drupal being your full-time job, and then a bunch of you only, partially, which probably means you're using other systems, WordPress, Joomla, or something completely else. So how many of you think you fit this category, or this group of categories? All right. Yeah. So I would say almost 70% of you. So chances are you have one of these, right? Or maybe if you're a girl, one of these. But it is true that in a way the Drupal community becomes more and more professional. Like when we started Drupal, it was pretty much all volunteers. Nowadays there's actually a lot of people making money with Drupal, and I think it's one of the reasons why Drupal is successful. The fact that we have a successful commercial ecosystem around the project, I think, is what makes Drupal thrive. And so I sometimes joke that whenever I would start another open source project, not that I'm planning to, that's something that I would really look for, like the ability to build a commercial ecosystem around the project, because I think it enables a project to grow, and I think it enables us to make a big difference. I think it would be, for example, at breakfast somebody was wearing a GNOME t-shirt. I don't know where the person is, but I think it would, I think it's, obviously it's a great project, but it's difficult to make money with GNOME, right? And so I think it limits your ability to really advance a project at the pace or at the rate that Drupal is advancing. So I'm very happy that people make money with Drupal. That's the short version. having said that, what does that mean, right? Because a couple of things are happening. Because people start making money with Drupal, the business owners, they do like to see Drupal go into the enterprise, because that's where the bigger projects are. That's how they can grow their teams faster. And also that's where the higher margins are. So they actually do make more money as well. On the technical side, I would also say that the experienced Drupal developers, they also enjoy going into the enterprise because, let's be honest, like, we like to work on the next big problem, right? And so the next big problem is usually where the bigger sites are. And so I think there is a natural tendency for Drupal, both driven by sort of the business owners as well as the developers, for Drupal to evolve and to become more enterprisey. At the same time, there is a set of users that, a big group of users, smaller shops, and they do make a lot of money. They do make a living sort of working on small websites. So how many people would say they work on small websites? All right, and how many on big? I mean, it's obviously the rest, but it seems to be like 50-50-ish. So the question is, should we go, given that it's 50-50, should we go more towards the enterprise, or should we go more towards sort of the small end of things? So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. I would like to run my thoughts or share my thoughts and then maybe get some feedback. So I would say that if you look at it this way, I would say that Drupal's sweet spot right now is sort of, mid-market. And by that I mean people that need Drupal's flexibility to build, fairly interactive websites. They use things like content types and views, and they usually have sort of more dynamic website. So it's much more than a brochure style website. And so some typical examples I would say, and I tried to Google some examples in Australia and New Zealand, would be maybe the website of the Governor General, could be the website of the National Library. It looks like a very nice website. At the same time, not overly complicated. Could also be like e-commerce websites like this one, which I liked a lot actually. I don't know it, but these are some examples. I think in the high end, in the enterprise, things start to be a little bit different. Like people need multiple servers because they want to have they want the site to be highly available. They want to be able to do load balancing as well as provide redundancy. Often people need content staging. They have teams of people working on their sites, and they need controlled processes to take things from sort of, development of content, if you will, to production. They want to do configuration management. How many people know what configuration management is? All right, so some people do. But an example of configuration management, which is something Drupal isn't good at today, by the way, would be the following. So at Acquia, we had a customer. They're a media company. They had a website for a TV show, right? And so, because they're a big company, they apply quite a bit of rigor to the process. And so what they did is they built a website, they load tested the website so that they knew it would scale to, certain amounts of traffic, which they estimated would be the amount of traffic that they would get when the show would come on air. But so they did all of these weeks in advance, right? So they build it, they test it for scalability, and they sort of sign off on it, and then they move the site in production. But what happened was, one of their engineers, they decided to make a quick change. Quick change, only will take a few minutes. To make the change, they had to disable Drupal's caching for a minute. And so he goes into a production site, disables the caching, makes a change, then obviously forgets to enable caching again. And so the site sits there for weeks, no traffic, the show comes on air, all of a sudden hundreds of thousands of people go to the site, and obviously it goes down. And so then it takes you sometimes hours to figure out what went wrong, right? And so configuration management provides us two things in this particular case. One, the ability to lock down a configuration. So nobody can like go in and quickly change something, as well as the ability to trace configuration changes. So you can actually see something you can't really do right now with Drupal, like when did somebody change what, right? And so if we had good configuration management, this problem would have been, we could have avoided it. There's other advantages, but this would be a quick example, as well as editorial workflows. A lot of these big media companies have dozens of people editing content. They're not always very happy with the way that works. So example websites would be, these. Some of these are American, but I think you probably know them. Others are Australian as well. Like Turner, it's one of the biggest media companies in the world. They own CNN, as well as a bunch of many other websites. They're small websites. They get millions of visitors a month. They're big websites, hundreds of millions of websites a month. I think in Australia, probably the website from the Prime Minister. I can imagine that they don't want that site to go down. I can also imagine that they want to apply some more care, if you will, when it comes to publishing new information on that website. Obviously not involved with any of those, but I'm just imagining things. I would say ABC would probably fit in that category as well. It's comparable probably to the media company that I described. This one, I have no idea. But when I don't even know it, but when I Googled it, it looked like a big deal. Would it be fitting for this category? No? I don't know. Really? All right. That's right. At least I'm honest about it, right? I'm making things up as I go. Yamaha could probably be in this category, or maybe not. Anyway. And then, of course, you have the small businesses. I mean, for them, it's all about usability, ease of use. They're frustrated with Drupal's learning curve, all of these things. So example websites, and probably I'll get these, hopefully I'll get these ones right. But a small business selling, wetsuits, typical Australia. Or, a moving company, right? Or this informational website about, senior care would be a good one. And there's many, many more. There is literally, hundreds of thousands of these, right? So, and they have completely different needs, right? They want to build a site quickly, and they don't want to, upgrade it. Ideally, it would just sit there and work for many years to come. So the question really becomes, are all of these websites really different, right? How are they different? And I think if you look at enterprises nowadays, some of them have thousands of websites. We're working with one company which has 800 Drupal sites, and they're going to go to 3,000 of Drupal sites. And not just one company, right? But even small companies, like, Acquia is a small company in my mind. We have probably 20 websites, right? So it's like your public-facing website, you have an intranet, we have an HR website, we organize events, so we have websites for each of those events, we have some marketing microsites that we built, so quickly, people have a whole bunch of websites. Some of these websites are small, other websites are, more meaningful. But your typical enterprise will have a whole bunch of different websites using a whole bunch of different technologies, right? Joomla, WordPress, proprietary stuff like Jive, Vignette, Sitecore, all of these things. And they also run on all sorts of different technology stacks. Could be PHP, Java, .NET, all of these things together. And so what's happening right now is that a lot of these organizations, they're starting to realize that Drupal is actually a good fit for some of these websites. And they're moving, batches of sites over from different systems to Drupal. And so they're starting to standardize on Drupal as a platform. And so a great example would be in the media and entertainment industry. So, I spent quite a bit of time in New York, and we work with a lot of the large media companies. And so, hold on, I'll go back one slide. So, a few years ago, they used all of these different systems. Like if you look at Turner as an example, CNN would be obviously their biggest site. That would be A. They would use platform A. And then for their medium to low-end websites, they would also use all sorts of different systems because they were built by different people in the organization. They worked with agencies a lot, and each agency had their own preferred technology. And so they had all of these different systems. But nowadays, all of these media companies, they've decided to standardize on Drupal for almost all of their websites. Most of them for both the medium and the low end. Some of them prefer to use WordPress on the low end and Drupal in the sort of in the medium layer, which obviously is quite exciting for us, right? It starts to fulfill this vision of people standardizing on Drupal, and it's also where the opportunity might be, at least according to the 3,000 people that fill out the survey. So they said the #1 opportunity for Drupal is to replace legacy platforms, which is exactly what they're doing in these organizations, as well as to reduce IT costs, which is also exactly what's happening, because if you have 30 different technologies, you need experts on all 30 different technologies, versus if you go to a single platform, you need fewer experts. There's more leverage, more knowledge sharing across these platforms and so forth. And so the interesting thing to me about these is also that there's, if these are the two biggest opportunities, there's very little engineering that needs to be done, right? These are primarily marketing things that we need to do to basically tell the story about people are standardizing on Drupal and using that to reduce their costs. It's not like there's missing, we can always do better on the technology side to enable this, but I think most of it is there already today. So what does that mean, right? Well, to me it means actually that we should be focused on both, because even the largest enterprise has those tiny little microsites which are built by, say, the marketing department. And the marketing department sometimes is very much like a small customer within a large organization, right? And so if we do focus on both, what does that mean for Drupal 8? And so I want to transition into Drupal 8 a little bit. So I looked at all of the things that we're focused on Drupal 8, and I think we can roughly categorize them along those 4 dimensions. The first one being multi-channel. It's kind of an ugly word, I guess, but it's multi-channel, multi-device publishing, or if you want to call it mobile, you can call it mobile, which is probably a friendlier way to put it, although I think it's slightly less accurate. But the goal here is to change Drupal so that we can output content in multiple different formats, which will enable mobile, but may also enable Drupal to publish to a TV or something, right? Or to other devices. Doesn't have to be just mobile. And so covered in that are, the web services work that we're doing, along with Whiskey. It's one of the initiatives, the Whiskey initiative. It's to change Drupal to enable to do so. But we also have an HTML5 initiative. And so we want to make HTML5 the default output for Drupal 8. And that's coming along pretty nicely, which obviously will be great to enable mobile web experiences in the browser, if you will. Whereas the web services initiative will enable people to build native mobile applications that run on your iPhone or Android device. And obviously, if you think mobile, I think these two things we need to enable at the same time. I think, at least in my mind, the future of the web is a future where it's not just web, but it's web plus all of these applications. And so we need to transform Drupal to be able to play nicely in such a world. Hence web services. At the same time, visiting a website from your mobile device also needs to work well. So HTML5 is really important there, as well as things like responsive design, image scaling based on the device, and stuff like that. And that's covered by the mobile initiative. So I think in this area, we launched a number of formal initiatives in Drupal 8 to help make sure that we're successful with this. To me, if I think about Drupal 8, I would like the world to say mobile. That's kind of the big theme, if you will, for Drupal 8. So if you try to sort of loop that back to what we just talked about, I would say that at this stage, probably enterprises, bigger sites care most about mobile, because they do have the budgets to add on the mobile application and all of these things. I think on the smaller sites, they don't have the skill sets or the budget today. However, I would say 3 years from now or 2 years from now, I think this would probably be equal across all the categories. I think it's a matter of time before, even for small websites, we'll see mobile applications. The other thing I would describe as the editorial experience. And this is an area where Drupal traditionally has been a little bit weaker, or a lot weaker. But things like media management, being able to upload an image and being able to use it, sounds like basic content management. But it's something that we've struggled with, right? Inline editing and WYSIWYG, one of these other things which all of our competitors ship with out of the box. Drupal never did, and it's been hurting us. But also, and I called it useful content administration overview page, which is kind of a long word, but if you think about it, there's not even a search box on the content administration page. So you go there and you get this long list, hundreds of thousands of titles, and there's no way to effectively find what you need, right? So simple usability things that can enable people to be more effective editing and managing content. And then, I guess more technical things like everything as a block or entity, which provides more flexibility on how to manage content. I would say all these things everybody cares about. Everything which touches usability matters for the low end, but also, frankly, for people in the enterprise. They also care about, making things easy to use. Then I grouped a bunch of things in sort of deployability. And in my mind, these are things like configuration management, which we talked about a little bit, right? But also content staging. How many people know what content staging is? All right, most people know. Maybe I'll briefly explain it, because not everybody knew. Content staging is essentially the ability to work on a bunch of content, and then to work on them sort of in offline mode, if you will, so that they're not visible in production, but that they are visible to a subset of the editors, for example. And then for them to have the ability to move, push things into production, either by clicking a button or by scheduling publication of a group of stuff. So if you're a magazine, for example, you may want to create the next version of the magazine. And you work on that for many weeks, and then you say, on the 1st of the next month, we're going to basically put this in production, and then the site changes, menu items may change, colors may change, and a whole bunch of things may change. Something which is really hard right now in Drupal. We can do revisions at the node level, as most of you probably have seen, which is cute, but for larger organizations, it's frankly not enough. They need to be able to do effectively what we do at the node level across nodes, but not just across nodes, but also affecting menu items and blocks and all of these things. So that's content staging, and with content staging comes a whole bunch of complications, the ability to preview a site and all of these things. So it's a hard technical problem. And then something else which is called universally unique identifiers. It's a little bit more technical, but it enables things like content staging, but it also enables things like syndication between websites, content sharing across different websites, all of these things. So I would say primarily the bigger users care about this. I don't think the small users care about this too much. For this, we do have an initiative Greg Dunlap is working on the configuration management initiative. And so I feel like we'll be able to pull this off. And then I would add a category which I call technical housekeeping, which is as Drupal grows, as Drupal gets more complex, we need to invest time in cleaning it up, improving our APIs, all of these things. So adopting modern paradigms like object-oriented programming, design patterns, all of these things. Better separation between product and framework, a big discussion in the community, always has been. But also, a whole bunch of usability cleanups. It's also technical housekeeping, right? So we moved CCK into Drupal 7, and it comes with a UI, but frankly, the UI is kind of cumbersome. And so we also need to clean these things up. And there's a long list of things here. I just added a few. I would say the small users care a lot about, as well as the medium-sized users. The enterprise, not so much. I mean, they're still using SAP, right? As an example. So for them, it's not necessarily the most important thing, as long as they can get their job done. But I think for us, a lot of us developers working on sort of the mid-sized projects, we like clean APIs, right? We like to be efficient and effective in our work. And so it matters a lot to us. So how are we tracking? This is the wake-up call. So, yellow, red, green as sort of status codes. I think we're doing reasonably well in the multi-channel. I think the HTML5 initiative is coming along nicely. Already a whole bunch of stuff in Drupal 8 outputs HTML5. We have more to do. But I feel like we're making nice progress. I would say the mobile initiative is also coming along. I think where we struggle a little bit, although I'm not overly worried about this, is the whiskey project. We have some existential questions there, as some of you may be familiar with. We're trying to figure out what the scope is of the project and how much we want to change. Do we want to rewrite 95% of Drupal, or do we want to rewrite 10% of Drupal? And so we're trying to figure out where the slider should go. But I think we'll get on top of that as well in the next few weeks. Whoops. What did I do? All right. So the editorial experience, I call it red because, frankly, almost no one is working on this. There's no official initiatives in this category. So when I think about things where I need to launch another initiative, this would be one category in my mind. There's a lot of work to be done here. People should care about this, I think, because it affects all of these different users. Yet nobody really stepped forward to make a big impact, which is something that I'll be working on to try and fix. Oh, what did I do again? Deployability with the configuration management initiative. Greg posted his first patch. I looked at it on the plane, actually. I'm at the plane right over, and it looked nice. But I was pretty convinced that we were on the right track. I've not given him that feedback yet. But I think it's pretty much good to go. And on the technical housekeeping, I think we've done an okay job. I think there's been a lot of cleanups already in Drupal 8. There's many more to make, so I colored it yet because I don't feel like people are like. When I read people's sentiment, we're not there yet. Although I'm pretty satisfied with the progress we've made. So I think if we do all of this, I think the sweet spot of Drupal, which again in my mind right now is sort of mid-market, what will happen I think is it will essentially sort of become more broad. I think we'll be able to better service, if you will, the small sites as well as the big sites, which to me is pretty exciting. And so I think to sort of bring it all home, if you look at the survey results as well, if you look at these results carefully, and I've separated them between small and medium and enterprise, what you actually see is that they care about the same things, right? That's what this data should present to you. Like they share the number one thing that they would like HTML5 support. They also share the number 2 item. Sort of there's a little bit of a disconnect between what should be 3, but and then better APIs as well. So if you look at what people want the most and where those people come from, turns out they actually care about the same thing. So again, to me, this means that we should focus on both, because if we, it doesn't mean, I guess it means the same pretty much, right? And so that's why I think it's very important to keep in mind that our opportunity, in my mind, is to fulfill this vision, the vision of enabling organizations to use Drupal for pretty much all of their websites. It's the one CMS to rule them all vision, if you will. That doesn't mean every website should run Drupal. Well, there's always going to be better solutions for some of these sites, but you get the idea, right? And I think it's important to internalize, because often people come to me and they say, oh, we should be afraid of, name your favorite CMS. Let's call it WordPress. And I think we should be, but I think we should be for other reasons than what most people think. Most people think, Drupal is losing against WordPress in the low end, right? That's what people say. And that may be true, but I think the bigger fear is the fact that if we believe this is the vision, then we should be afraid of WordPress going after the same vision. We shouldn't be afraid of WordPress beating us just in the low end, right? And so that's how I like to think about it. And I hope more and more people will start to think about it the same way. But we'll see. And with that, I would be happy to jump into the discussion. So I don't know how much time we have left. 20 minutes or so?
Yeah, more.
More? How much?
35 minutes.
35 minutes, alrighty. That should be fun. Any questions? And by the way, you can ask me any kind of question. It doesn't have to be about the presentation.
Dries, would you mind talking just a couple of minutes about the object-oriented aspects in Drupal 8? Thanks.
Sure. Let's see. I'm not sure there's much to say about it, honestly. But I think...
What kind of classes?
Sorry?
What classes, for example?
Right. I mean, I guess what I'll say is when I started Drupal, I don't think PHP did object-oriented stuff. Or maybe it started doing so, but it wasn't working well. But obviously nowadays, the object-oriented features in PHP have matured quite a bit. And so with Drupal 7, we've introduced more and more OO. And I think with Drupal 8, we'll introduce a lot more. So, and that's really what I was going to get at. I think it's important for us to adopt those things now that they actually work. And I think it's important for a number of reasons, but the most important reason in my mind is the ability to attract more people to Drupal. I think our biggest problem still is the lack of Drupal talent. And as new people graduate from school or get into programming, I mean, they start with object-oriented design. They learn all of these things in school, and then to go back to sort of procedural programming is kind of shocking for them. Whereas when I studied, we learned procedural programming first, and then, and oh, by the way, there's also this other world, which is emerging, which was object-oriented programming. So anyway, long story short, I think we should do more object-oriented programming in Drupal 8, and I think we should do so because of, as a way to keep up with modern times, and that affecting our ability to attract people to Drupal. So I'm not sure that answered your question. No? Other question?
My question is around the commercial aspects that you kind of touched on. Like WordPress, for example, seems to have a very big commercial modules sort of ecosystem. Where do you see, well, and in Drupal, you know, there's a lot of emerging software as a service players like Giga that are in the 50, 100K a year implementations that are getting their modules onto Drupal as open source. Where do you see that ecosystem going in terms of commercial modules or commercial software as a service based products? Right,
it's a good question. It's also a big question, trying to structure my thoughts. So I think both WordPress and Joomla, they have this notion of commercial modules, or you know, where you have to pay to get the module. I'm very happy that we don't have that in Drupal. So I hope we don't go there. And I also know that both WordPress and Joomla, they're trying to move away from that model. They're moving away from the model by banning proprietary modules from their websites, which I think is a good thing, right? So where I hope to see the Drupal project evolve into is, you know, more professional services companies, you know, shops building websites for customers. I think to be successful in the enterprise, we need bigger ones, frankly. It's hard for large organizations to work with small companies. They would prefer to work with bigger companies. So I would like to see people build bigger companies. I would also like to see a lot of the Drupal shops to develop a little bit better competitive knowledge about proprietary software technologies. It's funny, a lot of us know WordPress and Joomla well, but then when you say, how does Drupal compare to Sitecore, or how does Drupal compare to Vignettes? Very few people actually are able to articulate a good answer. But there's a lot of money to be made there, and a lot of money that could be invested back into Drupal, right? So I think it would be healthy for us to learn more about these competing technologies, because that's, I think, where the real competition is. That's my personal opinion. I would also like to see more people specialize. I think there's an interesting fear in the Drupal community that there can only be one specialist. Like, and I may be exaggerating a little bit, but let's say 4Kitchens is a specialist in performance, or Tag 1. But you know, other than these two, there's not many. Or Curve, you know, we acquired Curve at Acquia now, but they were the specialists in migrations. So why aren't there 20 companies specialists in migrations? Because there is plenty of demand for you know, specialization. Or mobile. Where are the mobile Drupal shops, right? And so I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and I think it's healthy. I think it's healthy because it also allows you to remain smaller. Large companies, when they do big websites, they'll pull in specialists for, you know, each of these different things. And so love to see more specialization. What else? You know, I like to see more entrepreneurial spirit. I mean, starting a consulting company obviously is an entrepreneurial thing, but what I meant was more of a product-minded focus. I love it that there is people like Pantheon out there raising money, building a startup around Drupal and trying to productize something. I think that's very healthy for Drupal. I think it will benefit all of us. So I would like to see more of those as well. And they're starting to happen, I think. There's a couple of other companies that are trying to build you know, products and services on Drupal, which is good.
The software as a service based offerings?
So software as a service based offerings, I think, are a great idea. And you know, there's a number of them. I don't think I know all of them, but you know, at Acquia we've built Drupal Gardens, which is a software as a service based offering. There's Buzzer. Not sure if you've heard about Buzzer. I think in the UK there is another company called SubHub or SubHub Lite. So there's a number of people that are starting to build the WordPress.com for Drupal, if you will. And I hope they're successful because it really helps with the low end, frankly. It really helps people get into Drupal and to learn about Drupal. And I think that's important because even if we make Drupal super easy to use, there's always going to be pain points which we cannot fix. And that's getting it installed, upgrading it, right? These are always going to be tricky, frankly. Software as a service offerings, they will basically eliminate those pain points. And it's one of the reasons why WordPress is so successful. They actually have more websites on WordPress.com than they have self-hosted WordPress sites. And it's a giant marketing machine, right? Everybody thinks WordPress is super easy to use because, well, they're all on WordPress.com and they don't need to worry about installing it, upgrading it, all of these things. So I think it would be very strategic, very beneficial for the software as a service based offerings to be, really successful. And I think they could also create a new ecosystem around Drupal of much smaller companies, people doing maybe $500 projects or $1,000 projects by leveraging software as a service, which is a lot of what the WordPress ecosystem is, right? Individual consultants or freelancers building quick sites. It would be great to have for Drupal because in many ways it's sort of where the supply line starts, if you know what I mean. Like, we need more people into the Drupal project, so we need to find ways to get them involved early on. And these kinds of offerings help people to get in, and hopefully this will sort of graduate to other things Drupal, bigger things Drupal that you need to be more skilled for. So.
Dries. Good morning. What parts of Drupal 7 weren't you happy with? And by design, what parts of Drupal 8 aren't you happy with, or where it's going, or where do you think it could improve?
Yeah. So before I answer that question, let me preface, is that the word? With saying I think one of our best properties, the best elements of our DNA, I think, of this community, other than the fact that we like to party, is the fact that we're never happy. We're producing amazing software. I mean, we are. Like, if you look at Drupal 7, things are exploding right now. And yet, we go around whining about all the things we don't like about Drupal 7 and how we screwed up this and how this could be much better. And I think it's wonderful. Although I think we should also stop and celebrate all the great things we do, which I don't think we do enough of maybe at times. But so anyway, so there's a lot of things in Drupal 7 that I think that could have been done better. Things that I wish would have gotten in, like performance obviously regressed on average. Some pages got faster, other pages got slower. We made trade-offs. Scalability got much better. So that's the good news. But the bad news is that performance was often an afterthought, I think is a word, right? So we didn't really think about it too much until the end. So hopefully we can do better in Drupal 8. I would like to see us have more of a performance test culture, where we, just like we do integration testing for patches, I would like us to do a lot more performance testing in Drupal 8. I wish we could have fixed some of the usability things in Drupal 7 that we didn't get to. I mean, obviously Drupal 7 UX was a giant topic of discussion. But if again, as I travel around the world, people are most excited about all of the usability improvements that we made in Drupal 7. And I think we could have made more. And I think it would have benefited Drupal. But there's a lot of things we didn't get to because it was not always easy to build consensus around some of these things. So that's frustrating to me because I can see the potential being there, but then not being able to fulfill it because it's hard to build consensus is sometimes frustrating. I would like to see us do more of that as well. At the API level, there's a lot of APIs which could have been done better. We've spent a lot of time working on the entity API, and now we're already talking about redesigning that from scratch. Part of that is things we couldn't foresee. Part of that is lack of time. And so, anyway, I think release management in software engineering is always hard. You have to like cut things off, and that means having to make compromises. So, I wish we had done things like mobile sooner. That's one of the things I'm worried about. Like when I speak to people and I say, so Drupal 8 will do this, this, and this mobile configuration management, people get visibly excited. Like they start jumping up and down. And then their next question is, so when will this be ready? I'm like, well, maybe 2 years from now. And then they like get visually, frustrated. And it's a long time because some of these things are happening now, right? Mobile, they need that tomorrow, frankly. And for us to tell them it may take 2 years, it's not a good message for them. It doesn't mean that we're host. There's a lot of, all of the stuff you want to do today with mobile is available, frankly, in Drupal 7 using contributed modules, but making it part of the core platform and making Drupal 8 one of the go-to platforms for building mobile applications, I think, is exciting to people. So I don't know if that gives you a sense. I can keep going.
Hi. As a developer, I'm really excited that the core is getting better, but as a deployer, I'm a bit terrified about the upgrade path. Most of my sites, I'm still not really that keen on upgrading to 7 because we're very module heavy. I'm a little scared I'm going to have to go 6 to 8. And how will the upgrade path just of core go?
I don't know. Yeah, it's tough. It's kind of like, it is hard to upgrade Drupal sites. What can I say? It's kind of something that we have chosen to do, if you will. Like we as a community, and I guess as a project lead, I've chosen to break backwards compatibility. And that has advantages and disadvantages. The advantage obviously being that we can innovate faster, that we can stay state of the art. The disadvantage is that we do make changes and that these changes make upgrading faster. I think it's a best long-term strategy, but it always creates short-term pain. So when we do break things, we try to be very careful. We try to provide upgrade paths. We try to migrate people's data. We will never let people's data go broken. But it is a big topic of discussion, and as we get bigger, that pain becomes increasingly painful. So maybe at some point we need to have the discussion whether we want to change things. And I continue to think about those things as well. And I guess more recently I'm kind of sort of inspired by the Python model, which may be a good model for us, I don't know. It wouldn't apply to Drupal 8, but it could be applied to Drupal 9 potentially. And so the model there is, they do break APIs, I believe, but they also maintain a backward compatibility layer for one major release. So what that would mean, imagine a world where we would have this, and Drupal 8 gets released. That would mean you could run Drupal 7 modules on Drupal 8, but you couldn't run Drupal 6 modules on Drupal 8. And when Drupal 9 gets released, you would be able to run Drupal 8 modules, but not Drupal 7 modules. And that solves a few problems. It solves the big upgrade problem of contributed modules, right? So right now it takes about a year or something to upgrade modules, or enough modules. That would basically go away. The downside, though, is that it adds a lot of extra work for the core developers, because they would need to build this backward compatibility layer into Drupal. Right now, the core development team is already pretty overwhelmed. So I don't know if we can sort of ask them to do that right now. Plus, I think we're already too far into Drupal 8 to make that change, but it may be an option for Drupal 9. I mean, I'm not saying it will be, but I think it's worthy of conversation. Question? I'll repeat the question if you want. I'll be your mic.
Just continuing on with the same line of conversation. Okay. Is there an option to, I mean, the 5 to 6, the volume of sites that came on Drupal 6 is significantly larger than the volume of sites that were on 5, and the size of those sites and this, like the exposure that those sites had, and the scale is a lot larger than it was on 5, and it's kind of where Drupal came of age. Is there the option that we would revisit the, 6 becomes end of life when 8 is released? Because I think that would ease a lot of the nervousness, particularly from business owners, that, oh, my software is no longer supported. Even if it was only from a security perspective, that might ease that transition. Is that something that would be...
Yeah, it's a good question. So, if I've understood the question correctly, it's about us. You couldn't hear a question? All right. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Excellent. So I'll repeat the question, or I'll try to. So I think the question was, right now, I'll give you a little bit of background information. So right now we only maintain the 2 latest versions of Drupal. And I think the question was, would we consider maintaining more versions of Drupal?
Not necessarily maintaining it, but not, there's like a stigma associated with saying, oh, that's end of life. You know what I mean? And so rather than say it's end of life, if we just said security fixes only, and then particularly at the lower end of that triangle, the small businesses wouldn't feel that they had to upgrade because they felt safe that what they were on, and let's face it, Drupal 6 is a very stable platform. If they didn't want any new features, they could stay on that longer and longer.
Yeah. So the question is whether we would maintain older versions of Drupal longer. And I think I would be very open to that, frankly. I think it comes down to having the people do that. I would be happy to maintain more versions, major versions of Drupal, if there's enough people willing to help with those things. That's what it comes down to. So.
I was just, with all the movement recently of removing some of the core modules outside of core, and what you've been talking about getting mobile into core and all these great new wonderful things, is there a concern that it again is going to slow down development once Drupal 8 comes out and there is this wonderful mobile framework and then it stops because you can't continue the development until there's a next major version?
Right.
Is that something that you've thought about?
So it would stop because nobody would maintain it? Or
in the sense that you can't do a major change, like with Forum being in Drupal 6, you can maintain it, but you can't do anything drastic to it. Like in Contrib, you can go from a 1.x to a 2.x and make a completely drastic change. You can adopt new techniques. Sorry. Can you repeat the question?
I can try. I don't think I've been very successful. I think the concern comes down to, as we move things from Contrib to core, it affects our ability to innovate. We can innovate slower, I guess, right? Because core release cycles are longer, versus in Contrib they would be shorter, and there would be faster iterations. Is that a good summary? Yes. Well, let's see. So that is a little bit of a concern, and it's a balancing act in a way. I think there is tremendous value moving things from Contrib to core as well. I think it de-risks a lot of things, frankly, for the millions of sites out there. But yeah, the downside is it may slow down some of the innovation. Which I think is a valid concern, and I think it's one that we should talk about more. I don't have the answer, but if we could change our release cycles and go faster.
Some sort of middle ground between core and Contrib, where core is the framework, as there's been a lot of discussion about small core, and then having still maintaining one team, but with a quicker release cycle.
So I'll repeat the statement, I guess. So Stuart, is it right? So Stuart says, what about a middle ground? Something between core and contributed modules, where we're able to innovate faster in the middle ground, I guess, in a magical way. would that be a solution? And I don't have the answer, but it could be a solution. I think it's been a long discussion, and I think it's been challenging for us to weigh the benefits and the disadvantages of all of these approaches. I think in an ideal world, we would have unlimited, engineering resources. I mean, it's kind of an ugly word, but like we would have unlimited people contributing to Drupal, and then we could do these things. I think where often the disconnect is the fact that there's only so many people really contributing to Drupal core, and so we can dream up these alternative worlds of how we could work, but then I don't think they're practical given the number of people that are truly working on core. Like there's already so much work for them. There's way too much work right now, and so maybe if we go to this model, there will be these people, new people that sort of magically start to take on ownership of these modules. But I'm not sure. And if it doesn't happen, what do we do then? So there's a lot of questions. I think maybe we should try an experiment with making one module the middle ground, or two modules the middle ground, and see if it works. I think more experimentation here would help guide us, I think. But I think we should continue to talk about it. So, question, and then...
In a similar vein, it seemed to take a long time from Drupal 6 to Drupal 7, and there were a lot of things that we wanted at different times, and spawned things like press flow and other distributions that patched core and did things to bring in those features. Have you considered, or is it worth moving to more like an Ubuntu model, say, where shorter, small releases, and then maybe periodic bigger releases?
Right. So it relates a little bit to, did everybody understood the question? Nice. I'm getting better, you guys are getting better. So have we considered different models? We've talked about them. And I myself, I would really like to see shorter release cycles. I think it would help us go faster. I think one of the big issues right now is because it takes 2 or 3 years, it doesn't really provide a lot of incentives for people to contribute to core, because you can do your stuff and then you need to wait 2 years before you can actually use, or 3 years before you can actually use the things you've contributed, right? Which is not really rewarding for people. If we can make that shorter, I think people would be more, encouraged to make changes to core. So from that point of view, I would love to see us adopt a shorter release cycle. Where it gets scary is that we do break backwards compatibility, right? And so for people, end users, that frankly don't want to know anything about core development, they just want to use Drupal, it really scares them because they need to upgrade, if they need to upgrade, everything is going to break. And contribute modules, all of the contributed modules maintainers, they would need to upgrade their modules even faster. So I think backwards compatibility and our ability to shorten the release cycles are connected. Like imagine we would say we will never break backwards compatibility, right? Then we could do a new release of core every 3 months because it will just magically work. And that's where the real tension is. So if we figure out an alternative to what we do with backwards compatibility, I think we can innovate on how we do release cycles. But I think they're connected. So again, I don't have the answer yet, but I think it's something that we should discuss. And again, look at WordPress. A WordPress 1.0 module will actually run on WordPress 3. Whatever they have, which is quite mind-blowing, right? And so they do actually do like a new release every 6 months or so right now. And it's working well for them. At the same time, if you open up WordPress and you look under the hood, it's not really great. It's kind of gets ugly. If you're a real engineer, if you will, a formally trained engineer, it's not something you fall in love with. I mean, I don't want to say bad things about WordPress, but it's just different. Because they basically have to live with the design choices that they made 5 years ago. If we were to force that on ourselves, you know, Drupal would be a lot different, right? So again, it comes down to trade-offs. And we as a community need to figure out what the right trade-off is. I think as we get bigger, we'll get more pressure to fix the backwards compatibility issue. So maybe some point we'll flip over and say, let's change it. And hopefully we'll find some sort of middle ground. So. Alrighty. I'll be. Yes, I'll be very fast. Amy, you were like this all the time.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, Dries. Yeah, I've got the mic, so.
That's fine.
I win.
We can call you Amy now.
That's fine. Yeah, as you're talking about Drupal moving further towards larger enterprise websites and presumably larger organizations, how can Drupal encourage more contributors from those organizations? Yeah. You're talking about maybe larger dev teams and different cultures. And
right. I think it's a good question. Something that I've talked about with the Drupal Association. Frankly, I think the way to get there is to change the way we recognize organizations. Meaning, right now we have a culture of recognizing individuals, regardless of what company they work for. Like, so the people that you know in the community, you know the people, right? And oh, by the way, they work at Palantir or they work here. I think it would be very healthy if we could provide recognition to the organizations that they work with, because frankly, a lot of these people, they contribute to Drupal because their organizations allow them to. And I think more organizations would be willing to contribute to Drupal if they got some of the recognition. And so having something on the .o, company profiles, you know, leadership boards where we list maybe, you know, amounts of contributions per company or amount of contributions per headcount at the company. I don't know what it is, but some sort of mechanism to recognize companies. I think that would basically provide a lot of incentive for companies, because it's a way to get marketing for them. And companies do want to get recognized for all of their contributions because it helps them recruit people, it helps their profile as a company, all of these things. So that's one thing we can do. So, Amy? The real Amy.
I might get slightly shot here by everybody, but I kind of like the fact that we don't have as much backward compatibility, and that's because we can keep on, as you said, keep on going forward. But I think the way we can address, for me anyway, something that I feel coming from enterprise, one of the big things that we're lacking is the separation between configuration and content. So in a lot of the large enterprise systems, you've got data in the database and you've got configuration in a file set. And I think, I just wanted to know your thoughts on kind of being able to, or going down the path. I think if we were able to separate that a little bit more, then the upgrade paths or the customers, the clients, etc., you know, they'd still be able to move that data and export that data out. So it's not as much as being upgrading path from 6 to 7, 7 to 8. It's more about being able to take that content and then put it into a new kind of code base.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it comes back to the configuration management stuff that I talked about, right? So what we do there in terms of implementation, what will happen is you'll still be able to configure Drupal through the UI, but right now it stores things in a database, right? And so what we will do instead is store things to files. So all of the configuration will be in files. And that means you can, you know, tweak it from the command line. So you can configure Drupal from the command line, which is kind of nice, frankly. But also it means you can put it in version control, right? If it becomes flat text, then you can check it in Git or, you know, Subversion or CVS. And you can do diffs, so you can see the changes. You can also lock things down because it's in files. So if you change the permission of the files, and Apache can't write to it, people can't make configuration changes anymore through the UI. And so, effectively we're doing what you said we should be doing, which is separate configuration from content and also change the storage model so you can store it on files. I mean, you can also store it in a database still if you would like, but I think a lot of people will store in files instead. So, right, one more question?
Dries, earlier you mentioned that there's only so many core maintainers and people who are actually committing to or contributing to core. Is there something that the wider Drupal ecosystem can do to help that? Is it a resources issue? Is it an economic issue? What are some of the strategies that the wider community can help that?
How can we help, Dries?
Yeah, well, it is. I think it's a little bit of everything. I think one, it takes a bit of time to contribute to core, and I think not everybody finds enough time to do so, and so oftentimes it's easier to contribute to a contributed project. So there's definitely a barrier to get over. So I think giving people enough time to contribute will help. At the same time, I think we should work on lowering the barrier to get into core development, because that will help as well. I mean, if you look at many other open source projects, I think, and this is kind of sort of the sad truth moment. So maybe not a great last question, but I think a lot of other projects have gone through this evolution, and they all moved from a volunteer-driven project to bigger projects where there is more corporate involvement. And if you look at Linux, for example, just like Drupal, it was just volunteers. But now, most of the development to the Linux kernel is driven by IBM, Red Hat, and a handful of other companies that are contributing 80% of the stuff. And in it, maybe that's what's happening with Drupal as well. I don't know. I hope not. But if you look at, and I've thought a lot about this actually, and even outside software development, like if you look at the road systems, initially roads were being built by volunteers, right? They needed to go from A to B, and they just started walking, and roads emerged, and then people became more commercial, and they started to trade, and it was actually the traders building the roads at that point, which is very much what's happening in Drupal, right? It's us making money with Drupal, we're also investing in Drupal. At some point, though, governments took over maintenance of the roads, right? And so the road system went from a volunteer-driven thing to something which was increasingly more institutionalized. And the same thing with school systems. People teach each other, or taught each other, whatever the word is in English. And now it's run by governments. The same thing with I mentioned schools and roads. The same thing in a way with the military. Like people used to defend their houses because, well, they wanted to protect their families. And now, armies are run by governments. And so it feels like there's a real pattern there where things that start off as volunteer-driven evolve into more and more commercial and eventually sort of government-run almost. And I wonder if that's the future of Drupal. It seems that it applies to Linux to a large extent, and to other open source projects as well. So maybe that's where we're going. I don't know, but that would solve the problem, right? If imagine IBM came along and they said we're going to put 30 people on core development, would that be a bad thing or a good thing? It's hard to say, but it would help with the resource issue. So, alrighty.
Just also on that point, I only know of Melbourne and Sydney, but both Melbourne and Sydney have Twitter accounts. So if you want to get involved in development, or if you work at a company who has employees who you want to get them to help contribute, get them involved in the community. So you can follow Drupal Melbourne or Drupal Sydney on Twitter, and groups.drupal.org/Australia. And that's probably the best way to get involved locally. So.
Excellent.
Thank you, Dries. Everyone give Dries a hand.